There is a scripture in the 35th chapter of Exodus that opens up a subject that I don't recall hearing very much ever said about it. And the reason why I'm bringing it up today is because I was giving some programs not long ago on the subject of prophecy. And in the process of it, I got a letter, a fax actually, from a gentleman in Canada who, while he complimented me on the content of my program, felt that there was an essential element that I had left out of my presentation. And it has to do with this particular passage of Scripture in Numbers 35 and verse 30, beginning in verse 30. Whoever kills any person, the murderer shall be put to death by the mouth of witnesses. But one witness shall not testify against any person to cause him to die. Now, what's interesting about this, this is not the theme of the sermon today, but it's just a realization that it's very difficult in the face of this to make a scriptural argument against the death penalty. Or an argument that life is somehow sacred, because, life is just as sacred in the Old Testament as in the New Testament. And the Bible says categorically that if a man has committed murder, he should be put to death by the mouth of two witnesses at least, because one witness cannot testify against any person to cause him to die. Moreover, you shall take no satisfaction for the life of the murderer. In other words, he can't buy you off. There's no question here that, well, if I'll give a certain amount of money to the widow of the man I killed, is it okay if I don't have to pay for it? The answer is you're not allowed to do that. He shall surely be put to death. You shall take no satisfaction for him that has fled to the city of refuge, that he should come again to dwell in the land until the death of the priest. No satisfaction. You stick to your guns on this. And listen to what he says. So shall you not pollute the land wherein you are. For blood, it defiles the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed in it, but by the blood of him that shed it. It is absolutely the only way that the land can be cleansed of blood is by the shedding of the blood of the person who originally committed the murder. Don't defile, therefore, the land which you shall inhabit, wherein I dwell, for the Lord dwells among the children of Israel. Don't defile the land. Now, it's interesting, the land is dirt. We walk on it every day. We live on the land, and the land is something we take for granted. And yet here is a categorical statement that suggests that murderers, unavenged murders, actually defile not merely the society, but defiles the land. And I think that's kind of curious in a way that he should say that. And it's kind of curious that it should be presented to us in that way. But I got to thinking about this, and as Allie mentioned to me when we were driving up here, that, it's been a long, long time since God has spoken to us. Fact is, it's been some 1900 years since the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation. As far as we know, there has been no direct revelation, no inspired revelation of God to man that's been conveyed to mankind in general. Maybe he's talked to one person here or one person there for their own benefit. That's what I'm talking about. As far as I know, God has been silent for over 1900 years now, and maybe for some little time yet. But it occurred to me that the land may be speaking to us. Now, I'm not talking today about environmental issues that can be solved by politics. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about something much more serious than that, something where politics is really not the solution. This issue is not political, but moral. This gentleman who wrote to me from Canada about this question challenged me because he felt that I had overlooked the role of the land, the importance of the land, the effect of the land. And he ticked off some instances that he thought might be relevant to what it was I was talking about. He was talking about. Now, I wasn't so sure about some of his conclusions, but I was sure about one thing. Immediately when he said it, I knew immediately that he was right. I knew that the land does figure prominently in Old Testament Scripture, having to do with the defilement of the land, the effect of the land, and what we have done with the way we've lived our lives here. The land does figure strongly to it, but in ways that are not real apparent. Now, one of the things I'm going to try to do in the sermon this afternoon is to make these things more apparent. So if you'll turn back to the 18th chapter of Leviticus, we'll get back to the fundamentals, as it were, to something very basic in this matter of the land, the defilement of the land, and the effect of it on us. In chapter 18 of Leviticus, verse 24, defile not yourselves in any of these things, for in all these things the nations are defiled that I cast out before you, and the land is defiled. Therefore I do visit the iniquity thereof upon it, and the land itself vomits out her inhabitants. Now think about this. What we have learned archaeologically about the people who inhabited the land of Canaan before these people, before the Israelites came to it, was a civilization that, while it was technologically, in the technology of the day, more advanced than Israel, was morally bankrupt. These were cities, I think it was in the city of Jericho, they found the remains of small children that had been actually entombed in, perhaps alive, we don't know, or sacrificed and entombed in, the foundations of the gates of the city. The fact is that they would commonly, and a city was born, a new city was the walls were up, the city was being dedicated, and the laying of the foundation for the gate, that the ruler of the city would put his firstborn child, sacrifice him, and his bones were actually interred in the foundation of the city. This was a really corrupt society that was there. And he says the reason why the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites who were there, were going to be expelled from the land was because the land vomited them out. Now, I know that this can be poetic in the way that it's being put. I know that God himself is going to be the instrument in moving them out of the land. In fact, Joshua and the Israelites are going to be the rod in God's hand to chastise and to drive these people from the land. But the verbiage that is chosen, the way in which God chooses to speak of this is that the land vomits these people out. And then he says, you shall therefore keep my statutes, my judgments. You shall not commit any of these abominations, neither any of your own nation, nor any stranger that dwells among you. For all these abominations have all the men of the land done, which were before you, and the land is defiled. Now here's why I'm warning you this, he says, so that the land will not spew you out also when you defile it, as it spewed out the nations that were before you. In other words, he's telling the Israelites, you're going into a nation where the people have become so corrupt that the land is going to spit them out. And I want you to beware, because if you do the same things that they did, the land is going to spit you out too. That's going to be your end, just like it was theirs. For whosoever shall commit any of these abominations, even the souls that commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Now what he's talking about here is prompt judicial action. He's not talking, of course, in any case in the Old Testament, whenever it comes to punishment of a crime, to unilateral personal vengeance. Both Old Testament and New Testament, the individual is not allowed to pursue personal vengeance. Vengeance has to be instituted by authority. That is, the authority of the state, the authority of the civil government. In other words, the elders and the gates, the people as a whole, had to be responsible for carrying out the judgment against a killer or against anyone who did these abominations. But the instructions to the government were these people shall be cut off. If you don't do this, the land's going to spit you out too. So you shall keep my ordinance, that you commit not any one of these abominable customs that were committed before you, and that you defile not yourself therein. I am the Lord your God. Now, I don't know if it's occurred to you as you've read down through there to ask this question. Just what abominable customs are we talking about here? Are we talking about toxic waste dumps? Are we talking about solid waste, landfill somewhere where we put solid waste? Are we talking about companies, that are, chemically polluting the land? Well, this is not what God's talking about in this particular case. Those particular types of actions may be the end result of certain of the other ones, but that's not where he's going. If you'll come back to verse 24 where we started, defile not yourself in any of these things, and ask yourself, what are these things? We'll just ratchet back up to verse 23. Neither shall you lie down with any beast to defile yourself therewith. Neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down to a beast. It is confusion. In other words, no person is allowed to have sex with an animal. It's a terrible, abominable thing. I gather it was common among the Canaanites at that time. Not so common in our society today. But if you'll ratchet up one more verse, verse 22. You shall not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination. What he's talking about in the simplest possible terms is homosexual behavior. For a man to lie with another man like he might lie with a woman sexually, he says, is an abomination. And it is because of the things that happened in Canaan, that the land was defiled, that the Canaanites were going to be spit out of the land, and he warned the Israelites not to get involved in this kind of thing. And now we come down to the 20th century when we begin to really understand some of the implications of that kind of behavior in ways that we really didn't understand it before. I think we understood maybe as long as 50 years ago the increased incidence of certain types of diseases like hepatitis, like gonorrhea, syphilis, normal sexually transmitted diseases, which we used to call venereal diseases. But it's only with the advent of AIDS and the blood-borne diseases that we have really come to understand the implications of why God said, don't do this, because you will actually defile not just your society, you defile the land. Now, the land may be symbolic of society, it may be symbolic of a nation, it may be symbolic of a lot of things, but then you're still left with a question. Why does God choose the land as that which is going to be offended, defiled, and respond in the way of spitting people out to the crimes that people are going to commit? Ratchet up another one. You shall not let any of your seed pass through the fire to Molech. Neither shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. The implications are in this and other secular sources that some people historically sacrificed and burnt their own children fire to this God. Going back up to verse 20. Moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. Now, if you begin to, you go right on back up through all these scriptures that people wonder about uncovering the nakedness of people. This is just a euphemistic expression for having sex with people. And it talks about, incest. It talks about sexual relationships that are generally speaking, you think not even practiced among the Gentiles, but they were among the Canaanites. And he lists all of these things, like it's summarized with verse 6, you shall not approach to any that's near of kin to uncover their nakedness. Don't have incestual relationships with your family. And going back up now to verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and say unto them, I am the Lord your God. After the doings of the land of Egypt wherein you dwelt, shall you not do. Apparently, this is the sort of thing was also done in Egypt. And after the doings of the land of Canaan, where I bring you, you shall not do. You shall not walk in their ordinances and their customs. You shall do my judgments, keep my ordinances to walk therein. I am the Lord your God. Now, when you look at this awful, wretched picture that he draws for us here, it's something that's hard in many ways to get your mind around. But the thing that struck me about it when the gentleman sent me the facts was hearkening back to Numbers here again about the land being defiled. It's murder. It is sexual sins. It is the sin of adultery. It is the sin of homosexuality. It is the sin of incestuous behaviors of this nature. That these things, according to God, defile the land. Now, if you turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 21, just to kind of fill in some blank spots on this particular issue and to try to understand it. In Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 22, if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree. Now, generally speaking, the hanging of a person on the tree was not like we do it, we did it, I should say, in more recent times, of hanging him by the neck until he's dead. In those times, he was actually killed by stoning and then impaled on a tree, on an upright stake, is what he's talking about here. He said, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree. You shall in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God. You're to do this, that the land be not defiled, which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance. Now, it's not immediately apparent how that type of sin defiles the land. It's not particularly apparent how the sin of murder unavenged defiles the land. It's not immediately apparent how the death of the killer, purifies the land. But it keeps bubbling up throughout the law in God's Word. In Jeremiah, there's a longer prophecy which I think is rather interesting. Jeremiah chapter 2. And Jeremiah, by the way, may well be the strongest of all the prophets. Sometimes he's a little hard to read. If you ever want to really get a good dose of Jeremiah between the eyes, read him in the Living Bible, because the gentleman who has done that has done a fine job of paraphrasing Jeremiah in such a way that the 20th century man reads it, and he comes through so strongly. He says, hear ye the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob. This is verse 4 of Jeremiah 2. Hear the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, what iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they have gone far from me and walked after vanity and become vain? In other words, what have I done wrong, God asks. What iniquity, what failure, what problem have you found with me, that you won't listen to me. Neither said they, where is the Lord that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and pits, through a land of drought and a shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through, and where no man lived, and brought you into a plentiful country to eat the fruit thereof and the goodness thereof. They don't say this. Where's the God that brought us here? How did we get to this place? As I brought you into a plentiful country to eat the fruit and the goodness, but when you entered, you defiled my land and made my heritage an abomination. You defiled my land. Well, how did we do that? They would have asked. We've already seen, haven't we, how it was done. We've seen categorically. It was the death of innocent people, unavenged. It was the blood of people who had been murdered, who had defiled the land, of all the killings of people. And here we are in the 20th century with murder and the crime from blood from one crime running into the blood from the next crime. There are so many of them. And murder everywhere. And the killing of innocent people is common in our country, and it is, by and large, not being avenged. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that somebody should go out and blow up an abortion clinic or shoot a doctor somewhere. That's not right. That's taking personal vengeance. The vengeance has to be done by the state. If anybody tries to do it personally, they will do nothing but defile the land still further with the subsequent consequences, which we're going to see perhaps later on. When you entered, you defiled my land. You made my heritage an abomination. The priests, they didn't say, where is the Lord? And they that handled the law didn't know me. And the pastors transgressed against me. And the prophets prophesied by Baal and walked after other things that do not profit. This is so close in so many ways to the way in which our world is today. For it is the priests and the prophets, the priests and the pastors, that have basically said the law of God is done away with. I mean, you go from church to church, house to house in this country, from preacher to preacher, and ask them about it. And again they will tell you the law was abolished. The 10 Commandments were abolished. The law was done away with. It's all replaced in Christ. We're not under the law. We're under grace. It goes on and on and on and on. What does it mean by this? Well, in Israel, it was the same way. And the problem with it was it didn't turn people around from defiling the land. And the land continued to be defiled. Wherefore I will yet plead with you, saith the Lord, and with your children's children I will plead. You pass over the isles of Kittim and see. Send unto Kedar and consider diligently and see if there is any such a thing. Has a nation ever changed their gods which are no gods? Go ahead, look, I challenge you, he says. You find these people over here, their God is Malcolm. You find some more people over here, their God is Baal. You find some people over here, their God is Dagon. These have been their gods from time immemorial. Have you ever found one that changes their gods? God wants to know. I want to know. Tell me. The answer? No. But my people have changed their glory for something that doesn't profit. Be astonished, O you heavens, at this. Be you horribly afraid. Be very desolate, saith the Lord, for my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have cut out for themselves broken cisterns that won't hold any water at all. Why the land? You know, I think one of the considerations in this repeated reference to you have defiled the land, is to impress upon people's mind that there are external consequences for the sins that we commit. No man is an island. You know, you can't say, well, this is just something that's done between consenting adults. You just can't live your life that way and not have it have external effects on the children. I mean, it's one of the most astonishing things in our society today. It's being well documented every day. You hear story after story after story. Just listen to Dr. Laura Schlesinger, for example, and you'll hear story after story after story of broken marriages, of families coming apart, and couples trying to figure out what on earth are we going to do about our children. And people don't seem to be prepared. I've seen this in personal situations that people I've talked to as well, where somebody would say, you know, don't get this divorce. Stay together. Find a way to work this out for the sake of the kid. And the woman answered, oh, he'll be all right. He'll be fine. Just tossed it off. He'll be fine. The implication is we can work this out. We can commit this act, and because we can be diligent and knowledgeable in the way we handle it, we can avoid the consequences. No, you can't. More important, the little boy could not avoid the consequences. As frankly, they are being reared in many cases in families with in homes with no man in the house as a role model or even as a cultural model for them to know what a man is supposed to act like and how a man is supposed to respond to things. And because in our society it's gotten to the place to where men aren't important anymore. The male role is not important anymore. That there's really no substantive difference between men and women. I still haven't figured out how come they haven't merged the women's NBA and the men's NBA, since there is no difference between women and men. But that's another subject entirely. The point simply is of this, the lesson to be learned, one lesson to be learned by this repeated reference to the land, the land, the land, is that you are affecting something outside of yourself which is going to affect everyone else in the process. You can't just say it's okay between consenting adults and nobody else is being hurt by what we are doing here. I don't know how anyone can ever say that any longer, considering all of the object lessons we have in our society, but nevertheless people still do. In Jeremiah 16, he says, "My eyes are upon all their ways. They are not hid from my face. Their iniquity is not hid from my eyes. And first, I will recompense their iniquity and their sin double, because they have defiled my land and have filled my inheritance with the carcasses of their detestable and abominable things." They have filled the land with carcasses. Now, the carcasses, detestable and abominable things, is the language that God uses when he starts talking about the types of foods we're allowed to eat. You know, the listing off of all the animals, he says, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat the other thing, because they are detestable. They are abominable. And so we fill the land with the carcasses of animals that we eat that God said, don't do this. And he says this defiles the land. And I'm telling you, this is not talking about an environmental thing alone. The environmental effect of things we do is indirect. The direct problem is moral, not environmental. Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 16. "Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their own way and by their doings. Their way was before me as the uncleanness of a removed woman. Wherefore I poured my fury upon them for the blood that they had shed upon the land, and for their idols wherein they had polluted it. And I scattered them among the heathen, and they were dispersed among the countries. According to their way and according to their doings, I judged them." Now, it's intriguing to me that the sin is that the land is defiled. Because when you think of these things, that's not the direction your thoughts normally go. Your thoughts normally go to the children in the case of a broken home. Your thoughts normally go to the grieving family in the case of a murder. But to the land? There's something about this. You ask yourself, what are the consequences of this? Turn back to Jeremiah chapter 12. Jeremiah chapter 12, because I'd like for us to see if we can kind of come to grips with this idea. In Jeremiah chapter 12, he starts off by saying, "You are righteous, O Lord, when I plead with you. Yet let me talk of your judgments. I know you're righteous. I know you're right. I don't have any argument, but would you listen to me," he says, "on this one thing. Why is it that the way of the wicked is prospering? Why are they happy that deal very treacherously? Why is it that people seem to commit murder and lie and cheat and steal and become more and more rich all the time?" He says, "You have planted them, yea, they have taken root, they grow, they bring forth fruit. You are near in their mouth, but you're far from their range." In other words, they talk about you a lot, but you can't tell it by the way they live their life. "But you, O Lord, have known me. You have seen me. You have tried my heart toward you. You know who I am. Pull them out like sheep for the slaughter. Prepare them for the day of the slaughter." And then he asks this interesting question. "How long shall the land mourn?" The land, he says, is in mourning. Nobody else seems to be, but the land is. "How long shall the land mourn and the herbs of every field wither for the wickedness of them that dwell in it?" Everything's drying up, he says. Things are dying off. The land is mourning. The beasts are consumed, and the birds, because, he said, he shall not see our last end. If you have run with the footmen and they have tired you, how are you going to contend with horses? God says. Now, it's an interesting little metaphor he draws here. And I think that we could look around us in the world today and see the beginnings of the groaning, the mourning of the land for the things that have been done in our country today. God is silent. He's been silent for nearly 2,000 years. And so consequently, we might ask ourselves, well, since God isn't speaking it to us, how then can we come to understand? How can we come to know His will? How can we know what He wants and what He expects of us? Well, the old prophets still speak, and we can still look to the Bible for our guidance. But the land may also be talking to us at the same time in ways that we haven't said. And He says this, if you've got tired so far, if you're frustrated at this point, running with the footmen, how are you going to contend with horses? What He is saying by this is that the mourning that you are seeing in the land right now is just the beginning. It's going to get a lot worse. If in the land of peace wherein you trust they have gotten you tired, what are you going to do when Jordan overflows and the floods start rolling down on you? For even your brethren and your house of your father, even they have dealt treacherously with you. They have called a multitude after you. Don't believe them, though they speak fair words to you. He's talking to Jeremiah here. He said, I have forsaken my house, Jeremiah speaking. I have left my inheritance. I have given the dearly beloved of my soul to the hand of her enemies. Actually, I'm sorry, this is God speaking. When He says, I have left my house. I have left mine inheritance, my heritage. I have given the dearly beloved of my soul to the hand of her enemies. I've turned everything over to the hand of their enemies. I won't live among you. I'm not going to come into this temple that you are so proud of. And one of the key elements in Jeremiah is the way in which the people were relying on the proximity to the temple to protect them. And He says, don't say that. Don't say this is the temple. This is the temple. I'll be safe here. He said, no way. Go look at Shiloh and see what I did there, because I'm going to do the same thing here I did in Shiloh. What did He do in Shiloh? He laid everything up there level with the ground, just like He did Jerusalem. My heritage is unto me as a lion in the forest. It cries out against me. Therefore have I hated it. My heritage is like a speckled bird. You know, I came to this and I thought of that old song about the great speckled bird. Any of you remember that song? You know, if you do, let's talk about it after. I'd like to know if you remember the words. I could not come up with the words today. It's the first time I've thought about this very much, but in this context, it's very significant what He's talking about. The speckled bird, he says, all the birds round about her are against her. Come and assemble, all the beasts of the field come to devour. You know what happens, don't you, to a little small chicken if you have a bunch of little chicks and one of them gets a speck of blood on it? The other little chickens start pecking at the speck of blood, and finally they will kill it. And the idea of a speckled bird with all of the other birds round about him is that they are pecking at the specks on this bird. He says, my heritage is like a speckled bird, or like a chicken with blood on it. All the others are against her. Come and assemble, all you beasts of the field. Come to devour. Many pastors have destroyed my vineyard. They have trodden down my portion underfoot. They have made my pleasant portion a wilderness. They've made it desolate. It being desolate mourns to me, as the whole land is made desolate. Why? Because no man will take any of this to heart. No one seems to care. And in fact, so we are so occupied, so preoccupied with our own affairs, our own religious and church wars, that oftentimes the mourning of the land goes unnoticed around us. And we have been affected by the society in ways that honestly I don't think we even know. I'm not sure that we can appreciate the extent to which lives are being lost around us every day. In the incredible abortion industry that goes on in the country that we talked about at some length this morning, the selling of body parts, $75 for a tiny little eye, much smaller than yours, just a tiny little eye of a baby, $75. Can we feel that? Does it mean anything to us that right here as we sit in this room, except probably not today because it's a weekend, they take the weekend off, that through the week, in different places around the country, living children are being destroyed? I know they call them fetuses. The question of whether it's a fetus, whether it's really a person, is argued indefinitely in the law, but the inconsistencies in the law have been discussed at some length as well. But these potential citizens of the United States, these potential children, are being destroyed wantonly everywhere. And I wonder if, have we ourselves become so desensitized to it? I'm not suggesting that anybody go out and commit violence to try to stop it. I've already said that all that does is defile the land still further, because it is the justice system that must do that. But it's the justice system that has become corrupt to the place now to where they actually make this type of thing possible and defend the people vigorously that are doing it. And the land is defiled. The spoilers are coming out of all the high places through the wilderness. For the sword of the Lord shall devour from one end of the land to the other end of the land. No flesh shall have peace. They have sown wheat. They're going to reap thorns. They have put themselves to pain. They shall not profit. They should be ashamed of your revenues because of the fierce anger of the Lord. All the money you're making with this stuff, you're going to be embarrassed by it ultimately. The land mourns. You sow wheat, you reap the wrong stuff. You actually, time and time again, the birds are dying. The animals are dying. The destruction is incredible. Thus saith the Lord against all my evil neighbors that touch the inheritance which I have caused my people Israel to inherit. Behold, I will pluck them out of their hand, and pluck the house of Judah from among them. And it shall come to pass, after I have plucked them out, I will return. I will have compassion on them. I will bring them again, every man to his heritage, every man to his land. The time is coming, and the prophets are interesting in this regard. They go down into the depths, and they describe the worst possible things that you can imagine, and in the end they say, but I'm going to come back, and I'm going to pluck you out of this, and I'm going to save you from it. It shall come to pass, if they will diligently learn the ways of my people, to swear by my name, the Lord lives, as they taught my people to swear by Baal, then they shall be built in the midst of my people. If they will not obey, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation, saith the Lord. You know what he's talking about? He's talking about the nations around who are going to have to come to understand how they are to live. These are the Gentiles. How are they to live? Exactly like the Israelites live. They are to learn from them. And if they don't, the land is defiled with all the consequences. God has not spoken to us in a long, long time. And I think, as I said this morning, why should he? He has spoken to us by his Son. And as I think God's assumption is, if they won't listen to my Son, they wouldn't listen if I sent them another prophet. And so the chances are we are not going to see another prophet until 2 witnesses stand in Jerusalem testifying before God with miracles in just a short period of time before the return of Christ, and the wrath of God does descend upon this planet. That is something out ahead of us. God may be silent, though, to us today, but the land is speaking. In Jeremiah 23, this is one of those scriptures that I have to read and take very carefully to heart. Because in biblical parlance, I suppose I must be called a shepherd. I am either that or, in biblical parlance, maybe a prophet. Although God has never spoken to me as a prophet, I have no prophetic message, and I do not hold the prophetic office. But in the type that is here, this is the kind of warning that comes through to a person like myself who has a responsibility to speak the truth. Jeremiah says, my heart within me is broken because of the prophets. All my bones shake. I'm like a man that's drunk, like a man wine has overcome, because of the Lord and because of the words of his holiness. Now I read this, and I think to myself, here I am, so many thousands of years later, another world, another time, a time that is very wicked, a time in which this country could easily be referred to, just as Jerusalem was at one point, could be called Sodom and Gomorrah, because of the way in which we live our lives and the way we conduct our affairs in this country. And then I think here's a man, Jeremiah, whom, when he reads the words of God, when he hears the words of God, in that time, in that place, it made him reel when he walked. It made him act like a drunk because he was so overcome by the words that he read. The land, he said, is full of adulterers. Because of swearing, the land mourns. The pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up, and their course is evil. Their force is not right. Listen to what he's saying, folks. He's saying the land mourns. What does it mean? The pleasant places in the wilderness, the national parks, all these gorgeous places that we have set aside in the wilderness as pleasant places, they're all being dried up. Their course is adverse. Their force is not right. Why? Because prophet and priest are profane. In my house, God says, I have found their wickedness. So their ways are going to be unto them as slippery ways in the darkness. They shall be driven on and fall therein. I will bring evil upon them, even the year of their visitation, saith the Lord. I have seen folly in the prophets of Samaria. They prophesied in Baal and caused my people to go astray. In other words, they took away from the people the standards, the true teaching of God, the preaching of the law of God, the right way of God, and as the standard of right behavior was jerked from under them, the whole civilization began to become unstuck. Now one wonders, as we come to a time like we're living in today, when God is not talking to us, when God wouldn't speak to us, when He's hesitant to even recognize us as though we were His people because of the way we have lived our lives, that since He will not speak to us, do you suppose it's possible that the land might speak? And the description of what happens when the land speaks basically is environmental catastrophe. He said, I have also seen the prophets of Jerusalem, a horrible thing. They commit adultery. They walk in lies. They strengthen the hands of evildoers. None of them does return from his wickedness. They are all of them unto me as Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. They all act like Sodom and Gomorrah. And all of us know what Sodom and Gomorrah were famous for, don't we? This is the incredible immorality, total immorality, and violence is what those two cities were primarily known for. So when you think about these implications of this, now, you know, when you read also in the Old Testament about prophets, priests, and so forth, and princes, by and large, you are talking about the equivalent in the modern day world of Congress, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the President, the Attorney General. You are talking about those people who lead us, because that was the role of prophets and priests in the temple of God. That's what their job was. And so the government of that people had gone sour. And as a result of a lack of leadership in the government, the whole country had gone sour, and the land was speaking to them. And here we are now in the 20th century with our government going sour, and with the land speaking to us on every side. Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts concerning the prophets, Behold, I will feed them with wormwood. I'll make them drink the water of gall. For from the prophets of Jerusalem is profaneness gone into the whole land. It's the preachers. You know, religious leaders, civil leaders, the whole leadership of the country have allowed profanity or profaneness to go into the whole land. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, don't listen to the words of the prophets that prophesy to you. They're making you vain. They speak a vision of their own heart and not out of the mouth of the Lord. If you want to hear some of them, you can find them on television tonight. They will say to those that despise me, listen, they will say to people who hate God, you'll have peace. That isn't the way life works, folks. The people who hate God are not going to have peace. They say to everyone that walks after the imagination of his own heart, no evil shall come upon you. And so, perhaps without God lifting a finger upon your body, the land may speak. God is silent to us, but the land speaks. One of the toughest of the prophets, along with Jeremiah, is a man named Hosea. And some of the things that Hosea says are truly frightening. In chapter 4 of Hosea, verse 1, he says, Hear the word of the Lord, you children of Israel. For the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. And I'll tell you something, it really disturbs me. I'm all for the Second Amendment. I'm all for, not the Second Amendment, but the prohibition of the government interfering into the churches, the establishment of a state religion. I'm for the separation of church and state. But the problem we have got is that there is a determined effort, it seems, being made to drive out or to drive underground any knowledge of God in this land. And here's what he says. God has a controversy with the land because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. By swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood touches blood. He means by that the blood from one crime flows into the blood from another crime. Now I want to ask you something. Do you need a better description of life in this country today? Swearing, lying, killing, stealing, committing adultery. I mean, adultery is a cottage industry. I mean, it's something that's so common now nobody thinks anything of it anymore. And people don't even bother getting married anymore. Fornication is as common as going down to McDonald's for a hamburger. It's just something you take for granted. Sometimes you may even have people attending your own church who are shacked up, to use the colloquial term for it, that they have not been willing to make the commitment to marriage. It's one thing for visitors to come to our churches who are in that circumstance. It's another thing for members of our churches to be in that circumstance. That should not be. We have got to learn better than that. We have got to learn to stand for something. Because if you don't stand for some things along the way, pretty soon you'll stand for anything, as the old saying goes. Therefore shall the land mourn. Here it is again. The land gets defiled, and the land mourns, and when the land goes into mourning, it speaks to us. Everyone that dwells in it shall languish, with the beasts of the field, with the fowls of the heaven, with the fish of the sea shall be taken away. It was the funniest thing. Wednesday night I was stopped in Birmingham, and we were having one of those give and take sessions. I asked people, what is it going on in the world today that really concerns you? And one of the first things somebody mentioned was the ecological catastrophe that's taking place offshore, and the disappearance of whole species of fish, and the disappearance of the whole chain of food fish for great portions of the world that are disappearing. Why would that ever happen? Why would that kind of thing happen? Well, here it is. It's just right here. The land will mourn. Everyone that dwells in it will languish. The beasts of the field, the fowls of the heaven, and the fish of the sea are taken away. God is silent to us. But the land speaks. I've wondered a lot about this. And I've wondered, why is the land so important? Because it is. I mean, you can see it again and again. That the sins of the country defiled the land. And as time passes, the land mourns. And the consequences of the mourning of the land tear up the lives of the people. Why? Well, the first thing is it's God's land, and we have polluted it. That much is clear. Not merely environmentally, but with the blood of so many innocents, no one could ever count them. And the land is also important because it can speak to us. Is it possible, with half the country in flames, that the land is speaking a little louder than it has for some little time? And this is really strange. It's an unusual. Now, I think this may have happened at some time in the past, perhaps even before man was ever here, but certainly not in my memory has anything like this ever happened. I can't say that the fires are a curse from God, but they certainly are not a blessing, are they? Whether God had to lift a finger or not is really neither here nor there, because the implication in the Bible is that the land is defiled, and then the land itself mourns, dies away, becomes dry, desolate. The beasts die, the birds die, the fish die. Everything goes away. Why? Really because of our own stupidity. Not necessarily because God did anything. And when God is silent, all we can do is to listen to that which speaks to us. I am not a prophet, but I read the prophets, and I cannot believe that God is happy with a land like ours. Why don't you turn back a few pages to Jeremiah, the 5th chapter. Because in Jeremiah, the 5th chapter, a fundamental principle comes rolling out of it toward us. I don't know if any of you have had as I've gone through this today, any thoughts having to do with, well, this is the land of Israel we're talking about here, which is talking about Palestine. It's not talking about America or this place over here. And there are people who believe that we are Israel, and there are people who do not believe that we are Israel. But we go along with this in this way. Let me just point out to you Jeremiah chapter 5. Jeremiah says, "Run to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem, and see now and know in the broad places thereof. See if you can find a man." This is a challenge. This just breaks your heart to think about this. "See if you can find a man, if there is one there that executes judgment and seeks the truth, and I'll pardon the land." Go ahead. Find one. And I read this, and if I see this at all in an end-time, prophecy type thing, I have to wonder, where am I? Where am I standing when this fellow goes running up and down the streets looking for one person that executes judgment and seeks the truth? And I really think in this case where he talks about executing judgment, he's really talking about somebody who has the authority and the power to execute judgment. But the implications of this are that the nation is going to become so corrupt that it will have affected everyone. How then can anybody be saved? Well, there's only one way we can be saved, and that's with a Savior, by the grace of God. For as far as looking for our righteousness or our goodness to try to bail us out of something like this, it isn't going to work. He says, though they say, "Surely the Lord lives," they swear falsely. They clap their hand on the Bible, they put their other hand up, and they say, I swear to tell the truth, so help me God, and all that, and they'll lie in their teeth. I mean, it happens everywhere. And the thing that has made me so sad in the past few months is that it starts at the top. That the President of the United States puts his hand on the Bible, swears to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and lies in his teeth. And now the whole country knows it. You know, it's something that is just hard to deal with. But it shouldn't be, I suppose, hard. It should be hard. It should be something we mourn for. But it's predictable. It was predicted a long time ago that a people who follow the course of action that we are following will come to that. God might not speak to us, but the land might. He says, I say, the Lord, they swear falsely. O Lord, are not your eyes upon the truth? You have stricken them, but they haven't grieved. I mean, you've actually caused, world wars to take place. How many young men did we lose in World War I and then again in World War II? These incredible, staggering losses. And we feel we lost a lot of young men in Vietnam when we lost 53,000. It's a pimple of the men that we have lost in the history of our country. And many times we have lost these men. We went to war because we had to go to war. And going to war was the thing we had to do under these circumstances. But one cannot help but wonder that had we walked according to God's law, had we been a strong, obedient, law-abiding people of God, that we would not have had to have gone to war. That the fear of us would have been so strong in the world that the mere rattling of a saber would have put an end to it in the first place if we were a strong and moral people. But when the nations of the world don't believe what we say, when the nations of the world can't take the word of the President of the United States, when they can't be certain that the United States will act when they say they will act, it emboldens people, the nations of the world to take chances, to get themselves into situations where we have to take action, and then we get hurt just like they do. And so on it goes. We have basically gotten ourselves into this. He says, O Lord, your eyes are upon the truth. You have stricken them, but they haven't grieved. You have consumed them. They have refused to receive correction. They have made their faces harder than a rock. They have refused to return. I don't know, maybe somewhere along the line somebody started praying out there about these fires in the West and started praying for rain. Too late. We make prayer a last resort. Therefore I said, surely these are the poor. This is Jeremiah now talking for sure. Jeremiah said, this has got to be because these are poor people. They're foolish. They're stupid. They don't know the way of God, nor the judgment of their God. I know what I'll do. I'll get to the great men. I'll go speak to them, and they have known the way of the Lord. They know, don't they? And they know the judgment of their God. But no, these have altogether broken the yoke and burst the bonds. We're right back there again. Wherefore a lion out of the forest shall slay them, a wolf of the evening shall spoil them, and a leopard shall watch over their cities. Every one that goes out of there shall be torn in pieces, because their transgressions are many, and their backslidings are increased. How shall I pardon you for this? Your children have forsaken me. Well, why not? Why would you expect the children to do anything else? What are they being taught? What kind of examples are we setting for them? Let's don't express surprise that our children are going astray. Why are we so shocked and surprised that our children go into schools and shoot up the joint? He says, I'm going to pardon you for this. Your children have forsaken me and sworn by them which are no gods. When I had fed them to the full, then they committed adultery and assembled themselves by troops in the harlot houses. They were like fed horses in the morning. Everyone neighed after his neighbor's wife. Adultery, rampant, like you've never seen it before. Shall I not visit for these things, saith the Lord? And listen to this last phrase. And shall not my soul be avenged on a nation such as this? I don't care what you believe about the modern identity of Israel. It's irrelevant to this. We are a nation just like this. And God said, do you think I'm not going to be avenged on a nation such as this? We have become a nation that eat up our own children like bread. We actually sell their body parts. It's incredible. I would never have imagined 50 years ago in this country that we would ever come to this place. And there's a passage of Scripture in Lamentations 44, verse 1, conclusion. He says, how is the gold become dim? I'm sorry, it's 4:1, not 44:1. How has the gold become dim? How has the most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. Jerusalem has been besieged for some little time. And when he says, how has the gold become dim? He means precious, fine gold that you would have admired at one time doesn't amount to anything. It's just become dim. The stones of the sanctuary, you can pour them out in the top of every street. Nobody cares any longer because you can't eat stones. The precious sons of Zion, the precious little children of Zion, comparable to fine gold. How is it that they have become esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter? Even the sea monsters draw out the breast. They give suck to their young ones. But the daughter of my people have become cruel, like the ostriches of the desert. You know something's interesting about this? He makes this statement about the daughters of Israel becoming cruel at a time when food had run out. In fact, there's another part of Lamentations which will really break your heart, where they actually were eating their own children because things had become so bad in the city. He says, the daughter of my people has become cruel. But you see, they became cruel in a time of terrible national stress when there was no food. They didn't nurse their babies. They had no milk. What in the world are we going to say about a nation where its daughters become cruel in the good times? They have done these things in the green tree, Jesus said. What shall be done in the dry? You have fainted running with the footmen. What are you going to do when the horses come? You actually have had such an easy time of it, he would say to us today if Jeremiah were here. He would look at the wealth, he would look at the staggering, things that we have, and then he would look at the moral decay around us and at what is happening, and he would probably say, I don't have a message from God for you. God hasn't spoken to me about this. I don't know why. He told me some time ago to stop praying for you. God is silent, but the land speaks.